don't put your students at the centre of everything you do, you risk demotivating them. And without the fuel of motivation, the vehicle of learning is likely to splutter, stall, and stop. Now, signs of student demotivation can include not paying attention, interest in previously uninteresting things, a failure to participate, being unresponsive to questions, disruptiveness, ill discipline, frequently checking their phone, talking in their first language, reduced attendance to class, a drop in grades, failure to achieve career goals, etc. On the other hand, if you over-empower your learners, suddenly inserting an influx of self-governance into your teaching, this excessive autonomy can have unwanted consequences too. Not paying attention, interest in previously uninteresting things, a failure to participate, being unresponsive to questions, disruptiveness, ill discipline, frequently checking their phone, talking their first language. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm David Kaye, and I'm here in this hand in hand with teachers, real problems, real solutions methodology talk to speak about student-centered teaching and ways of getting the balancing act between teacher control and student autonomy just right. So, student-centered teaching doesn't mean sitting all your students in the centre of the room, although you can if you really want. In fact, the most important thing happening in a classroom is not how the teacher teaches, it's if and how the students are learning, to steal a line from Jeremy Harmer's Essential Teacher Knowledge. Imagine student-centered teaching more like a straight line then, a continuum. At this end is total teacher control, a lot of teacher talk and pupils as passive participants, an implicit assumption that learning happens by listening alone. As we move along, the responsibility becomes a position shared between teacher and student. And this far end is total student autonomy, and we'll talk about that too. But how, practically, can you move along the line towards a classroom condition that's truly student-centered? How far along should you move? And how can you do it carefully enough so as not to confound your class? A class who, culturally, may not be used to being active participants in the learning process. I want to give you 3 examples of challenges to student-centeredness and how to overcome them. The first challenge is seeing your teaching from your student's point of view. Then, I want to focus your attention on learner differences and diversity. Next, we'll assess the value of learner autonomy and realise that even letting go leaves you with a lot of responsibility. Okay, let's begin with the problem that many teachers have had, myself included. Failing to see your teaching from your student's point of view. I'm going to give you a list of words and you try and remember them. Ready? Angry, calm, confused, energetic, jolly, jealous, proud, stupid, strong, worried. Okay, finished. How many can you remember? Oh, not that many. You didn't do very well. Okay, let's try this again with a different set of words. Acidic, antsy, crabby, dashing, giddy, jittery, livid, maniacal, pompous, perplexed. You probably do look perplexed. How many can you remember that time? You did badly again? You're terrible. You really should remember those words. I told you them clearly. Wait. The first time was maybe a little too fast and too long. And maybe the second list of words were too difficult. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I should have considered how hard it is for you to remember so many words in such a short space of time. And that the second list of words were way above your level. And my feedback that focused on how bad you were and not how well you did is likely to have deeply detrimental effects on your motivation as the year develops. So here's what I do to add a little empathy into my lessons. When I plan lessons, I constantly view what I intend to do from my learner's point of view by basing decisions I make on their level, loves, and the language that interests them. For a course like LiveBeat, although topics are chosen to be age appropriate, that might mean doing a unit walkthrough, getting students to rank each topic, to test out how applicable each is, and the ones that don't connect, I'd consider ways to adapt or implement in a different way. Next, I now see my learners' learning as my responsibility. That mindset means I'm going to do everything I can to encourage everyone to succeed. And if they don't, I respond. One way I do this is by designing an end of lesson challenge in which learners elaborate on what they've learnt while I listen. Thinking about the adjectives I introduced earlier, I might do an exit pass activity at the end of the lesson where I'll tell students you can only leave when you've described 3 friends or family members to me using those words. Finally, I frame feedback to show I have high expectations and I'm not focused on failure. Out goes character-based criticism, as I did when I said "you are terrible" earlier. Replace it with positive feedback focused on performance and progress. So I might say, "I like the way you use new vocabulary in your presentation. You use eye contact well, but try to look at the audience more and maintain eye contact for longer next time." The next problem really is about maintaining motivation. I've taught classes that started out well, with students seemingly enthusiastic, but who became more and more withdrawn and less inspired to speak. Let's do another quick test. Make a list of cities beginning with each letter of the alphabet from A through to Z. But do it in your head, without pausing. Okay, how did you do? Well, like me, you probably started and then stuttered. Answers sprang to mind, but were superseded by better ones, while other answers probably came more slowly. You might have jumbled states with cities, countries with capitals in the hurry to get through each letter. Clearly, we could make this more effective. So here's what I do to maintain motivation throughout a course. Number 1, going back to the A to Z challenge, would your students have finished all this at the same time? No, it hardly ever happens. You could stop the activity as soon as the fastest finish, but what message does this send to slower students? It's a negative routine that, next time, will have the more leisurely paced learner questioning their purpose for participating. Instead, give fast finishers what American educator Madeleine Hunter named sponge activities. Challenges that, like sponges, can expand or contract depending on the space and time allowed. Make up your own on the spot. If we're learning adjectives to describe personality, as I introduced earlier, how about asking fast finishers to rank the adjectives according to the most desirable traits in a boyfriend or girlfriend? You could alternatively use the ready-made activities like the TIMEOUT activities at the back of new challenges. 2, when I set a challenge like the activity or ask an open question, I've been testing out a new cutting-edge technique. It's not doing anything. I wait and wait and wait. And if learners ask me to lend a hand, I ask them to ask their neighbour. And if they still need help, I ask them to ask the next person along. Allowing wait time and asking students to ask 2 or 3 others before asking me. When I allow this time and scaffold the preparation and multiple chances to practice, the production of language is deeper, more detailed, and done with much more confidence. The last problem I would like to discuss in the context of learner-centered teaching is learner autonomy. Now I'm going to pause the video for a moment, and when I do, I want you to work on anything you want, but something constructive around language learning, but make it good, okay? Here we go. Okay, welcome back. How was it? Most likely your problem was that being overwhelmed with options and there were too much learner autonomy. You probably panicked a little because this personalised learning activity had no parameters. The task was too general and my criteria of making it good was not specific enough. So here's what I do. Number 1, I set aside time for students to pursue projects they're passionate about, or I adapt ones from my textbook to allow them more freedom. For example, in Next Move, projects and tasks are set out for you, but they're adaptable enough to allow our learners some feeling of ownership, and that's important. You might have heard of Genius Hour too, where for a period of day, or even a week, pupils work on something they want. The tech giant Google attributes many of its greatest innovations to doing the same thing with their staff. But even though we're right at the far end of our continuum, where students decide what they're doing, the teacher is far from passive. It's your job to push, provoke, and point students in the right direction so they work on these kind of projects successfully. Number 2, I accept that embracing autonomy means relinquishing control. Students using a digital platform to present their project on probably know more about it than I do. So I have to consider myself the project manager, giving timelines, co-constructing goals, etc. Number 3, on the subject of goals, I often allow students to develop their own rubrics, asking them what criteria we can use to judge a project on. For example, if we're creating a poster, I'd require good language content and some creativity, but they might want to add in scores for composition, colourfulness, or another criteria you hadn't even thought of before, and that's the best bit. So remember, student-centeredness is not about classroom location. It's about shifting how you teach to be about how your learners learn. It is something culturally we may not be used to, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't move along the line from controlling to negotiating, from doing all the speaking to doing all the inspiring. Because, like the educator, author and Aikido expert George Leonard said, lecturing is the best way to get information from a teacher's notebook to a student's notebook without touching the student's mind.